Hi, welcome to the Last Emperor podcast. Today I want to talk about the aesthetics of the Last Emperor. I think finding beauty in the world, in art, is one of the greatest things in life. It's one of the things that makes life worth living. And it probably separates us from animals like dogs. I don't know if they think about stuff like that, but we certainly do. Human beings like to look at nice things, and The Last Emperor is an outstanding show of colors and scenery and beautiful snippets of parts of history that are now almost all vanished. So first I want to talk about the look of the movie. This movie is just such a visual treat right from the start, especially in the first half of the movie. Right away, we're viewing the pageantry of the royal court of China, the amazing and colorful costumes, the traditions that probably seem very alien to most Westerners, and I'm guessing many modern Chinese and East Asian people, all these ancient traditions, and just the fact that this little boy is crowned an emperor on the same day, or in the movie it's the same day that the Empress Dowager dies. I mean, I know it was maybe not exactly that time in the true story, but the movie shows it that basically she anoints him and then she's just dead like a minute later. It's so odd and striking. And then they just put like a marble in her mouth, and I don't know if that is some kind of tradition in China, but it seems very odd, from our particular customs here in the West. And then this spectacular and famous scene of the boy emperor just running through the palace and beyond this yellow gold curtain into the courtyard where all these hundreds or possibly thousands of Chinese citizens are kowtowing to him, and he has no idea what's going on. So there's automatically just this very you're as the viewer, you're somewhat put into like a confused but fascinating state. You're almost like the boy emperor there, just running out onto this scene, and you don't really understand what's going on. And he doesn't know why people are bowing to him, and we don't really know either. I mean, it's a whole mystery why this boy is even crowned the emperor when he is not the child of the Empress Dowager. It's not even really explained. And then there's just these scenes of the royal court as we go through Puyi growing up and their traditions and the way the eunuchs are crowding around him. They are obedient in one sense, but then in the other sense, it's Puyi who is under their control. So again, it's very kind of mysterious and confusing, but it's so rich in color and tones that I'm so drawn in by it. And I especially like in this part of the movie, the very wide shots of the Forbidden City, where, especially the ones where it kind of zooms out and you're looking at Puyi sometimes by himself or sometimes with his retinue, and you just get a sense of like how big this thing is that he's a part of, how grand it is being the emperor of China, and he's just this one person we're looking at. Like when you're in an airplane and you start getting close to the ground and you can see cars and see people, and you see how much bigger everything is than the people around it. And he's just this child and put into this situation without ever wanting to be in it, without ever asking to be in it. And yet here he is as the camera pans out to this ancient city where all these emperors lived and died and ruled over the Chinese country, Chinese nation for thousands of years. So he's a part of this. And then we go into the more modern era. We, of course, there's the time where the younger scenes where there's the still a lot of the ancient traditions, the food tasters, a lot of the old Chinese customs still hold sway, and we're witnessing this. And of course also I want to say before we go into the modern era, the architecture of the Forbidden City, the very traditional like kind of Chinese roofs, and just the way it looks is just this enormous palace, and only the emperor and the people around him are able to live there. Just the fact that common people aren't, and almost get a sense of how exotic it is when there's that brief scene where Pu Yi glimpses outside into the China beyond the walls, and it's just all going on beyond his life, beyond his vision. And then, of course, the doors close on him and he's stuck in there. So these are some of the most, the early part of the movie in the Forbidden City is some of the most striking visually. And there's, I gotta say, there's a very, like, you really start to feel like the sense of kind of isolation and loneliness of the child emperor. And especially when you learn that he doesn't really see a lot of other children in his life. So when you see these beautiful shots panned out of the palace, the Forbidden City, where Pu Yi is running, he's trying to find his wet nurse again, and the camera actually follows him. It actually, there is a scene where it's kind of following him running as well, and you're seeing this distressed child who's just so, he just so wants that person in his life, and you see it on his face, and all you hear is like the footsteps around him for some time before the eunuchs catch up with him. It's just him alone in this huge city. So there's also, yeah, this always this kind of sense of not being sure what's going on. Like, he doesn't always know what's going on. He's just a child, and he's put into this very serious and very adult situation in a lot of ways. And this will lead me into the next part, talking about when he actually leaves the Forbidden City, because as I mentioned, now he's a child growing into this role as the emperor. He's growing up, I should say, as the emperor. And there's, of course, a whole wide world going on. It's a very unique period in time where you have a lot of the ancient and the modern is clashing. You have the emerging modern world of the 20th century that's clashing with ancient traditions. And this is happening not only in China, but in a lot of other places in the world too, if not most of the world. Because in China, we see it through the influence of the West in the royal court, whether it's the introduction of glasses for Pu Yi, a bicycle, him cutting off his queue, which was the long hair that he had, whether it's him playing tennis in Western clothes instead of the traditional Chinese clothes. So there's evidence of that. There's just the fact that he's made into a constitutional monarchy, and there's all this uncertainty about the future of the Chinese Empire at this time. And then when he actually leaves the Forbidden City, us as the viewer, we're with him as he's now thrown into the wider world. And we're not sure what's going to happen either. He's unsure. We're unsure. Who's going to take him in? Is he going? Is something bad going to happen to him? Is he going to become the emperor again? It's all up in the air. And he first lands in the very internationalized city of Tianjin in China, and it's the 1920s, and there's just beautiful scenes of the kind of culture of the 1920s, which would be, in this case, the more Western culture, like the flapper culture, the dancing, and Puyi's introduction to Western music, and now he's just dressed. He gave himself an English name, and he's kind of living sort of as a Westerner in Tianjin. And this time is he's living there, but there's a lot of dark undercurrents which start popping up in the movie at this time. There's a lot of plotting going on in the wider world. Now the empires of the past, whether it's the Chinese Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the German Empire, even to some extent the British and Japanese empires, they're all either over, they're done with, or say the Russian Empire too, like they're over with, but there's still kind of this what remains is there's still this kind of jockeying for power going on between the remaining empires of the world. And it's still unsettled how the modern world is going to be. And even among, like what we see with Puyi, how much of the Western tradition is he going to take? How much of the Chinese tradition? And so there is this clash going on there. And then with the Japanese influence starts to become prominent. And eventually, as we know, they make him the puppet emperor of Manchukuo. Now, this is another example of the modern and the ancient, where Puyi kind of calls upon his Manchurian heritage as a justification for him to be the emperor of Manchukuo, because it's an ancestral heartland. And there's somewhat of a conflict about whether he's Chinese or Manchurian, whether he's actually betraying his own people or he's actually standing up for his heritage in this situation. And then when we move to the palace in Manchuria, this is great examples of kind of 1930s art. I don't know if it would be called like exactly the Art Deco that was prominent in the 20s, but it certainly seems like that to me, like the painting behind the emperor in his palace there, and some of the other styles, Eastern jewels like pilot outfit and the empress's outfits, all kind of like evocative of the 1920s and 1930s styles that were going on at that time. They've kind of discarded the ancient Chinese styles. But then when he is at his coronation, he is trying to call upon the ancient traditions. And like we see there some of, I suppose, what are the ancient traditions of Manchuria in his coronation. So now it's just getting into the fact that he's just gone beyond the boy emperor, and he's been in some ways like carried along by history. And this is because he is not somebody who's really ever shapes history. Potentially maybe somebody else could have with born into his same situation, but it's just the way the game played out for Puyi. He never influenced history, so he's like carried along by it. So in that way, part of the beauty of the movie is seeing this person who lives through these different eras and different cultures and traditions, and he's a part of it because of his prominence, but he doesn't, of course, like change any of it really. He's just a part of it, and whether willing or unwilling. So through his life, we're able to peer into the ancient, the modern, the Eastern, the Western, and within that, the Japanese, Chinese, Manchurian, all these, by virtue of him living this extremely unique and singular life, we're able to just as the viewers just see just this vanished world, which is pretty much over and is never going to happen again. And of course, there's World War II later on, where a lot of the, like, kind of the conflicts of World War One that were no longer resolved are going to be played out in World War II. Like, now it's narrowing down, like, between these remaining empires that were left over from World War One and what's going to be left afterwards, which is generally some split at first, at least, into the kind of Western Western world and the communist world become the major powers remaining in the world after World War II. And he is also carried along by this point of history because he is captured at first by the Russians, the communists, well, I should say the Russians, and by that I mean the communist Soviet Union. And the movie does not show any of his life in the Soviet Union. It comes back to his life when he is sent back into communist China, then ruled by Mao Zedong, and he's in prison. And you know what? These scenes are not, there's not as much color as in the scenes of the royal court. It's very gray, actually, very gray and white and black, just these kind of not as colorful tones at this point of the movie. But it's so striking to me just seeing those scenes where they have those kind of like Russian fur hats on and they're standing outside in the cold, and I guess it's some kind of roll call, or they're listening to a speech like that, and it's so stark. And a lot of these scenes are, they seem to take place in a very like the winter months, and I just really feel like that sense of being cold. And this goes along with kind of the darkest days of Puyi's life and him reckoning with the life that he had lived before and the decisions that he made before. So it's all very striking in that way. And even though it's not as colorful, I do really enjoy it as much as what the aesthetics of the first part of the movie. And they come back to, he's eventually released from prison, and one of the scenes in this would be the last part of the movie is the Red Guard scene. That's, to me, kind of brings back this sense of like what's going on. Like, it's confusing because now the man who was the governor of the prison is now actually, he's a prisoner himself of the Red Guards. He's being marched on by them as an enemy of communist China. And these Red Guards just kind of, they emerge out of nowhere. They're all really young. They do this whole dance. They sing this whole song. And as me as a viewer, I knew a little bit about the Cultural Revolution and the Red Guards from high school history, but it was just very confusing the way it all happened so fast. And it's like just 5 minutes before the governor is this he's the governor of a whole prison, and now he's an enemy. And it brings back, like, as I'm watching Puyi's like face as he's reacting to it, I'm somewhat reacting the same way. And this is the man who did so much for him and helped him so much, and now he's put into this kind of position. And something about the whole Red Guard's production there is just very striking. And the lastly of is the final scene in the Forbidden City, which is it's it's a very special scene in the movie. It's I mentioned before in another video, it's the only scene with like some kind of magic in it, I guess you could say, as the Emperor finds the little bottle with the cricket inside of it, and has this scene with the small child. But again, I think for me, the scene there's another scene. I don't know if it was purposely done, where I just it shows, it's another one of these wide shots of the Forbidden City that's very zoomed out. And whereas before there's the boy emperor alone walking up the steps of the Forbidden City, walking the grounds of the Forbidden City, now there's a much older man. And it just, the fact that he's coming back to this location where he once ruled China is so striking. It's so, it just really hits me. The just what kind of life this man lived, and that he still gets to just come back to it, return to it as just and somewhat ordinary man. There he is, just like in the same dress as everybody else in communist China, just walking through this palace where once he was an emperor, where once he held the potential to change the world. And for decades, he was a witness to some of the biggest events in world history. There it is, full circle. It just comes back to where it all started. And it right now, it means nothing. It means nothing that he walks through these grounds. And that's a part of it too, is that that's, I think what hits me is that it meant so much before. There's the scene where he can't even he can't leave the Forbidden City. Now he can go back there anytime he wants. And where he chases after Amo, I forget her name exactly, the wet nurse, he chases after her, and the whole like party of eunuchs chases after him. He was so important at that one time, and now these grounds are just like a museum. There's no emperor in them anymore, and none of any of that, the rituals, it means nothing anymore. There's no more eunuchs. There's no more of these consorts or royal ladies or staff anymore, and the pillaging of the palace and all the drama that went on there. Now it's all over, but it's still, the shell is still there. There is still something special about this place. So it ends on that note, and just kind of puts it together. It's just one more beautiful scene in a movie that's just full of these scenes that resonate. Not only are they just visually beautiful, but they resonate with me as the viewer. So I wanted to share that with you all, whether you've watched it or not, or maybe if you have, you'll think about some of these scenes maybe in a different way, or you'll just relate to how I felt with them. Maybe you completely disagree. Maybe you don't even like the movie. But I have this podcast to talk about things which I think are that are important from the movie, and maybe just talking about life or lessons from life. But also, I mean, part of life is, of course, just enjoying things and just enjoying our world and the people in it, and taking the good with the bad and just discussing it, and that's part of it too. So I really hope you all enjoyed this podcast. I want to make some others too. This one's been kind of a long time in the making, but I'm glad I get it out to you all, and whether it's good